They say the night changes the rules of the game. During the day, the world belongs to us, people with our schedules, our routes, and our comfortable illusion of total control. But when the sun dips below the horizon and the clock crawls past midnight, reality begins to fray at the edges. Especially on the highways. Especially in those places where the artificial glare of streetlights carves only tiny, fragile islands of civilization out of the void. I used to love driving at night. I thought there was a certain kind of freedom in it. The empty road, the steady thrum of the engine, just you and the infinite ribbon of asphalt. But after what happened to me last summer, I don't get behind the wheel after sundown. Ever. It was mid-July. I was pushing my battered old sedan down a godforsaken stretch of Route 66 in Arizona. You know the kind of place? It looks like time just gave up and stopped somewhere in the mid-70s. Faded billboards, abandoned motels, and miles upon miles of scorched desert in every direction. The AC in my car had breathed its last breath back in Nevada, so I had the windows rolled all the way down. The hot, dry air, tasting of dust and ancient asphalt, whipped against my face, offering no relief at all. I'd been driving for 14 hours straight. My eyes were burning, and my back had stiffened into a dull, throbbing ache between my shoulder blades. The dashboard clock read 1:47 a.m. I remember it exactly because those neon green digits were the only source of light in the cabin. My plan was to push through to Flagstaff and grab a cheap room, but the fuel gauge had other ideas. The needle had been resting on the red line for 20 minutes, and the low fuel light was staring back at me like an accusatory eye. Panic started to set in. Getting stranded in the middle of the desert at 2 in the morning without a signal, cell towers out there are non-existent, isn't just an inconvenience. It's a death sentence. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, squinting into the pitch-black darkness ahead. The engine had just started to develop an ominous hiccup when, like a mirage, a dim white light flickered in the distance. A gas station. A lonely, tiny two-pump station. There were no corporate logos, just an old rusted canopy and a square glass booth for the attendant. The fluorescent lights under the awning flickered incessantly, emitting a low, electric hum that I could hear even over the rumble of my engine. I pulled off onto the shoulder. My tires crunched over heavy gravel, kicking up clouds of white dust that immediately settled on the windshield. I killed the engine. Silence followed. A total, ringing, oppressive desert silence that pressed against my eardrums. There was only the ticking of cooling metal under the hood and that wretched buzzing of the lights overhead. There wasn't another car in sight. No truckers on the shoulder, no signs of life. Just the vast, black emptiness beyond the circle of light. I forced the door open and stepped out. My legs were heavy. The air outside felt even thicker than it had in the car. It smelled of spilled gasoline, hot sand, and something else. Something sickly sweet and rot heavy, like old damp leaves, even though there wasn't a tree for 100 miles. I walked up to the pump. It was ancient, featuring faded mechanical tumblers instead of a digital display. I pulled the nozzle. It was unnaturally cold, despite the 100-degree heat of the day. The metal felt like it was leaching the warmth right out of my palm. Before sliding the nozzle into the tank, I reflexively glanced toward the glass booth. The panes were murky, coated in layers of desert grime and streaks from rains that had dried up years ago. A dim yellow lamp burned inside. A man stood behind the cash register. I couldn't make out his face through the glare on the glass, but I could see his silhouette. He was wearing a dark shirt. He stood perfectly still. Arms down at his sides. Head tilted slightly forward. He wasn't reading a magazine, wasn't checking a phone, wasn't shifting his weight. He just stood there, like a mannequin in a clothes department store. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I tried to shake off the paranoia. He's just tired, I told myself. A graveyard shift in a hole like this would turn anyone into a zombie. I turned back to the car, jammed the nozzle into the tank, and squeezed the trigger. There was a loud, metallic clack, and the pump began to groan. The numbers on the old drum started to turn slowly. I leaned against the trunk, feeling the tension bleed out of me. The car was fueling. I was safe. With nothing else to do, I looked back at the booth. The attendant had changed his position. He was now standing sideways, leaning against the counter, staring directly at me. His face was still lost in the shadows, but I could physically feel that heavy, unblinking gaze. It made my skin crawl. You know that feeling when someone watches you for just a second too long? Your skin starts to itch. I nervously rubbed the back of my neck with my left hand. In that exact same moment, the man in the booth raised his left hand and rubbed his neck too. I froze. My hand stayed glued to the back of my head. My heart gave a heavy, thudding kick against my ribs. Was it a coincidence? People often mirror gestures subconsciously. I slowly lowered my hand. The man behind the glass did the same. The air suddenly felt impossibly heavy. The buzzing of the lamp overhead seemed to double in volume, turning into a drilling sound that vibrated inside my skull. I decided to test it. Slowly, without taking my eyes off the murky window, I took a step to the left. The silhouette behind the glass took a step to the right, perfectly mirroring my movement. I raised my right hand and pointed a finger at him. He raised his left hand and pointed back at me. It wasn't a person. It was my own reflection. But the booth window wasn't a mirror. There was light inside. I could see the register, the cigarette racks behind him. I could see the interior. And that silhouette wasn't dressed like me. I was wearing a light-colored t-shirt. He was in something dark, almost black. But he moved in perfect, terrifying synchronization with me. My brain scrambled for a rational explanation. Someone's sick joke? A hidden camera? I stood there, paralyzed by fear, unable to move. And then I heard it. The pump wasn't sounding right. The hum had become high-pitched, strained, as if the mechanism were choking. I snapped my eyes down to the pump's display. The tumblers were spinning. But they were spinning backward. 10 gallons. 9. 8. I wasn't putting gas into the car. The pump was sucking it out of my tank. Panic hit me like a physical blow. I grabbed the handle to yank it out, but it was fused to the fuel neck. The metal had become ice-cold, searingly frozen. I tugged with everything I had, scratching the car's paint, but it wouldn't budge. The numbers continued to race backward. 7 gallons. 6. 5. I glanced into the car's interior. The digital clock on the dash glowed a toxic green. 1:46 a.m. It had been 1:47 when I arrived. Time was moving backward. I looked back at the booth. The silhouette wasn't mirroring me anymore. He was pressed right against the glass. Now I could see his face. Or rather, what should have been a face. It was an absolutely smooth, gray surface, no eyes, no nose, no lips, but it was contorted into an unspeakable grimace of rage. He slammed both hands against the glass from the inside. The pane began to spiderweb with tiny cracks under his fingers. A disgusting screeching sound filled the air, like metal claws dragging across glass. He was coming out. Primal terror took over. I braced my foot against the car's fender, wrapped both hands around the nozzle, and wrenched it with a force that made my vision go dark. The metal shrieked, the fuel neck gave a sickening crunch, and the nozzle flew out, drenching my jeans in ice-cold gasoline. I scrambled to throw it to the ground. It hit the gravel, and a thick, black liquid continued to spew from it, a liquid that didn't smell like fuel at all. It smelled of damp earth and mold. I dove into the car, frantically twisting the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, but wouldn't turn over. The glass in the booth shattered with a deafening crack. I didn't look. I didn't want to see what was stepping out of that frame. I just kept cranking the starter, screaming at the top of my lungs. Come on. Move, you piece of junk. On the third try, the engine roared to life. I floored it. The wheel spun in the gravel, the car fishtailed, but the rubber finally bit the asphalt. I tore onto Route 66 without even turning on my headlights, just desperate to get away from that patch of light. I drove at 90 miles an hour until the light from the station was a tiny dot in the rear view and then vanished entirely. My heart was thumping in my throat. My hands shook so violently the car veered across the lanes. I looked down at the dash. The fuel needle was buried deep in the red. There was less gas than when I'd started. And the digital clock. It read 1:12 a.m. And it wasn't moving forward anymore. It was frozen on those numbers forever. I drove in total darkness for 2 more hours, expecting the engine to die any second, but it kept running. I rolled into Flagstaff on a dry tank, running on nothing but fumes and pure adrenaline. The next day, I tried to find that station on Google Maps. I traced the entire route. There were no gas stations within 100 miles of that spot. Not abandoned ones, not active ones. Just bare desert. I've since sold that car. I couldn't stand to be in it. The smell of damp earth never truly left the interior, no matter how many times I scrubbed the seats. If you've ever gone on a long night drive, you know how easily the mind starts playing tricks on you. Do me a favor, drop a comment right now with your city and what time your clock shows at this exact second. I'm truly curious who is out there listening to these stories in the dark. And if you're already feeling a bit on edge, double check that your doors are locked, hit the like button, and let's move on to the next story. Trust me, we're just getting started. There's a specific kind of loneliness that only long-haul truckers truly understand. When you're hauling 40 tons of freight across the country, that rig becomes your entire world. It's a tiny metal capsule hurtling through the infinite night. Inside the cab, It's warm, it smells of coffee, cheap air fresheners, and stale cigarettes. You listen to the hum of the radio, watching the dashed lines of the highway hypnotize you with their rhythm, and you feel safe. Until that safety shatters. This happened about 3 years ago in Missouri. I was hauling a load of high-end electronics from Chicago down to Dallas. The schedule was tight, and I was already behind because of some nasty traffic backups leaving Illinois, so I decided to push through the night. The weather was miserable. Somewhere past midnight, the sky just opened up. It wasn't just rain, it was a solid wall of water. The droplets hammered against the roof of the cab with such violence it felt like I was driving underneath a waterfall. The wipers were screaming on their highest setting, smearing the deluge across the glass with a rhythmic, grating screech, but visibility was still barely 30 feet. By 3:00 a.m., my eyes were starting to give out. The glare of oncoming headlights reflecting off the wet asphalt felt like needles in my retinas. My head began to heavy nod, and falling asleep at the wheel of an 80,000-pound rig on a slick road is a one-way ticket to the morgue. I saw a highway sign for a rest area 2 miles ahead and took it as a sign from God. I pulled off the interstate. The truck stop was massive but nearly deserted. Only 3 or 4 other rigs were huddled in the far corner, dark and silent. There was no infrastructure, no diner, no showers, just a giant, paved wasteland illuminated by towering poles topped with orange sodium lamps. In that light, the puddles on the asphalt looked like pools of liquid metal. I parked far away from the others, right in the center of the empty zone, and killed the massive diesel engine. The vibration that had been my constant companion for the last 10 hours vanished instantly. In that same second, the roar of the rain crashed down on me. Without the engine running, it sounded deafening. I yanked the privacy curtains shut, sealing myself off from the world, kicked off my boots, and climbed into the sleeper berth behind the seats. I zipped myself into my sleeping bag and closed my eyes. I was so exhausted I should have blacked out the moment my head hit the pillow. But sleep wouldn't come. You know that feeling? Your body is spent, but your brain is running at high RPMs, hyper-aware of every tiny noise. I lay there in the dark, listening to the drumbeat of the rain. The glow of my phone screen read 3:20 a.m. Then I heard it. A dull, metallic thud. It came from the back. From inside my trailer. My eyes snapped open. My heart picked up the pace. I strained to hear over the rain. Nothing. Just the wind, I told myself. The load probably shifted. Pallets groan and settle sometimes, it's part of the job. I closed my eyes again. Creak. The long, drawn-out groan of a wooden pallet being dragged. And then, footsteps. Someone was walking inside my trailer. I froze, stopping my breath. Sound travels in a very specific way inside a 53-foot aluminum box. It resonates off the walls. These steps were heavy. Methodical. Thump. 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 Someone in heavy boots was walking slowly from the rear doors toward the front of the trailer, straight toward my cab. I physically felt the truck sway on its air ride suspension as the weight shifted behind me. Blood rushed to my face. My first thought was lot lizards or cargo thieves. There are gangs that hit these remote stops to boost freight. But how could they have cut the heavy padlocks so quietly? And why would someone be pacing around inside the trailer in the middle of a torrential downpour? I sat up slowly, careful not to let the mattress spring squeak. My hand searched under the seat until it found my heavy iron tire iron. The handle felt cold and solid in my palm, giving me a desperate flicker of confidence. I carefully peeled back the edge of the curtain and peered into the side mirror. The rain distorted everything, but in the orange glow of the lamps, I could see the rear of the trailer. The doors were shut. No cars nearby. No people. But the footsteps inside didn't stop. Now they were right against the back wall of my cab. Only a few inches of metal and plastic separated us. I heard something heavy lean against the wall. Then came a scratching sound, like someone was slowly dragging their fingernails down the aluminum from top to bottom. The sound was so vivid it made my jaw ache with revulsion. I couldn't just sit there and wait to be a victim. That cargo was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and if someone was in there, I had to scare them off. I shoved my feet into my boots without tying the laces, threw on my raincoat, gripped the tire iron, and threw open the cab door. The blast of icy wind and water nearly took my breath away. I jumped down onto the asphalt, and freezing water immediately flooded my boots. I ducked around the front of the cab, hugging the metal so I wouldn't be an easy target. The rain blinded me. I kept blinking, squinting into the darkness under the trailer. Nothing. I started walking along the long side of the rig toward the back. Every step I took made a loud splash in the puddles. When I reached the rear doors, I stopped. The heavy padlock I'd snapped on back in Chicago was right where it belonged. Intact. The bolt seal hadn't been tampered with, either. No one had opened this trailer from the outside. And at that moment, standing in the pouring rain just inches from those locked doors, I heard it again. The footsteps resumed. And they were moving toward me. Thump. 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 Someone walked right up to the doors from the inside. There was a dull thud against the metal panel right at my eye level. I saw the metal bulge outward by a fraction of a millimeter. I scrambled back, raising the tire iron, ready to crack the skull of whoever came bursting out. My hands were shaking from a cocktail of adrenaline and cold. "Hey!" I screamed, my voice cracking and nearly lost in the roar of the rain. "I'm armed. I'm calling the cops." The only response was silence. And then, I smelled it. Through the scent of wet asphalt and diesel exhaust, an incredibly sharp, chemical aroma cut through. It was the smell of the air a split second before a lightning strike, the stinging, nasal burning scent of ozone. And with it came the thick, nauseating stench of freshly turned, damp earth. The smell was seeping through the gaps in the trailer doors. I was trembling, but I had to know. I pulled my keys out with fumbling fingers and slid one into the padlock. The click of it opening sounded like a gunshot. I yanked the lock off, snapped the seal, grabbed the metal handle, took a deep breath, and heaved the right side door open, stepping back and winding up with the tire iron in one motion. It was pitch black inside. I pulled a high-powered tactical flashlight from my pocket and clicked it on. The beam sliced through the darkness, dancing over the neat rows of cardboard boxes full of electronics stacked on pallets. There was no one there. No signs of a break-in. No shifted boxes. No wet footprints on the wooden floor. It was completely empty. But the temperature inside the trailer was wrong. A tomb-like, unnatural chill rolled out of the dark, a cold far sharper than the rain outside. And that smell. The ozone and the grave dirt were so thick my eyes began to water. I stood there, sweeping the light toward the front of the trailer, and for a split second, the beam flickered. At the very back, where the light dissolved into shadows, I thought I saw movement. Like a shadow detaching itself from the boxes and sliding into the wall. My flashlight died. It just quit, even though the batteries were brand new. I mashed the button, but it wouldn't respond. In that same instant, the temperature around me plummeted even further. The hair on my arms stood on end. The air began to crackle with static electricity. I didn't stay to investigate. A primal survival instinct shrieked in my head. I slammed the trailer door shut with enough force to nearly take off my own fingers. I threw the latch, hooked the lock through without even snapping it shut, and ran. I sprinted back to the cab, slipping on the wet asphalt and tripping over my own loose laces. I dove into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and hit the power locks. I dropped the tire iron on the floor and twisted the ignition with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The diesel roared to life. I didn't warm it up, and I didn't check my mirrors. I just slammed it into gear and floored it. The rig lurched forward, crushing through the puddles. I tore onto the interstate, ignoring the blinding rain, praying for nothing but distance. I didn't stop until I hit Dallas. I drove without sleep, without food, pumping myself full of energy drinks until my heart was thumping out of my chest. When I finally arrived at the warehouse for offloading, the bright Texas sun was out. The warehouse workers cut my lock and swung the doors open. I stood off to the side, chain-smoking my fifth cigarette in a row. The cargo was in perfect condition. Nothing was missing. But when the guy went inside with his pallet jack, he stopped, wrinkled his nose, and shouted out to me. "Hey, man, were you hauling fertilizer before this? It smells like a damn graveyard after a storm in here." I quit the company a week later. I don't do night runs anymore. Because I know that whatever was in my trailer didn't come in from the outside. It started on the inside. And to this day, I still don't know if it actually left when I opened those doors. Have you ever stopped to wonder about the people you encounter in the dead of night? The ones in 24-hour diners, at empty bus stops, or lonely gas stations. We take them for granted, viewing them as mere extras in the movie of our own lives. But the graveyard shift changes your perspective. When you're awake while the rest of the world sleeps, your brain starts to notice the hairline fractures in reality. You learn to tell the difference between those who are simply suffering from insomnia and those who don't belong to our world at all. My third story took place when I was 22. I was working as a night cashier at a gas station in the industrial corridor of northern New Jersey. It was a bleak, godforsaken spot. There were no houses for miles, just the gray concrete boxes of warehouses, rusted chain-link fences topped with concertina wire, and an endless maze of empty access roads. During the day, the place hummed with life, semi-trucks hauling freight, workers grabbing cheap coffee and soggy hot dogs. At night, the industrial zone turned into a graveyard. Between midnight and 6 in the morning, I'd be lucky to see 3 customers total. That shift started like 100 others before it. By 4:35 a.m., I was hitting the wall. That's the hardest hour, the dog watch, as sailors call it. It's the time when your body screams for sleep, your eyes burn with dryness, and the edges of reality start to blur. I sat behind the counter, listening to the monotonous, low-frequency hum of the old refrigerators at the back of the store. The air smelled of artificial lemon floor cleaner and the metallic tang of pre-packaged hot dogs that had been rotating on the roller grill for at least 5 hours. I was staring at my phone, fighting to keep my eyelids from fusing shut, when I caught a flicker of movement outside. I looked up. Someone was walking toward the glass double doors. I hadn't heard a car pull up. No headlights had swept across the front of the building. The man had simply materialized out of the darkness of the parking lot. The doors slid open with a soft hiss. A man stepped inside. At first glance, there was nothing overtly terrifying about him. He was tall, dressed in an old-fashioned gray suit that seemed a few sizes too large for his gaunt frame. He wore a dark felt fedora, the brim pulled low enough to shadow the upper half of his face. But there was something fundamentally wrong with him. It was the way he moved. His footsteps were absolutely silent. No squeak of rubber on tile, no rustle of fabric. He seemed to glide over the floor, his joints moving with a fluid, uncanny precision, like a marionette controlled by a master puppeteer. I tensed up. My hand reflexively slid beneath the counter, hovering over the silent alarm button. The man didn't look at me. He bypassed the register, heading for the back of the store toward the beverage coolers. I followed him with my eyes, feeling a surge of irrational, primal dread rising in my chest. The air in the shop suddenly turned frigid. It wasn't just the chill of the air conditioning, it was a biting, bone-deep cold, like a January night in the woods. He disappeared behind a high rack of potato chips. I shifted my gaze to the convex security mirror mounted in the corner near the ceiling. It gave me a clear view of the entire aisle. In the mirror, I could see the snack racks, the glowing faces of the coolers, and the rows of soda cans. But I didn't see the man. In the mirror, the aisle was completely empty. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, thinking it was a sleep-deprived hallucination. I looked again. Nothing. I leaned out from behind the register, craning my neck to see down the aisle with my own eyes. He was standing right there. Directly in front of the cooler. Physically, he was in the store, but the mirror refused to acknowledge his existence. My heart began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. I wanted to shout, to ask if he needed help, but my throat had gone bone dry. The sound just wouldn't come. The man turned with a slow, agonizingly smooth motion and began walking back toward the counter. He hadn't taken anything from the cooler. He was coming for me. That's when I noticed the next detail. With every step he took, a stain appeared on the white tile floor. Thick, black droplets were falling from the soles of his shoes. Drip. 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 That sound was the only thing breaking the silence. The droplets looked like spent motor oil. They didn't soak in, they bubbled on the linoleum, leaving a continuous, filthy trail behind him. He reached the counter and stopped less than 2 feet away. Behind him were the glass entrance doors. Outside it was pitch black, and with the bright lights inside, the doors acted like a mirror. I could see my own pale, terrified face reflected in the glass. I could see the cash register. But there was no silhouette standing between me and the doors. The man cast no reflection. None at all. He stood perfectly still. He didn't smell like sweat or cologne. He smelled of old iron and something scorched, like the acrid scent of burnt electrical wiring. Slowly, he raised his hand. His fingers were unnaturally long, pale, almost translucent. He placed a pack of cigarettes on the counter, the cheapest brand of unfiltered smokes, taken from a display rack right in front of him. That'll be $7.50, I managed to choke out. My voice shook so violently I barely recognized it as my own. The man didn't say a word. He didn't lift his head. From beneath the brim of his hat, I could only see his chin. It was gray and featured a deep, jagged fissure, like a crack in old porcelain or a surgical scar. His hand slid back into his jacket pocket and emerged again. He placed a single coin into the small plastic change tray. There was a loud, ringing metallic clink. The coin spun on the plastic for several seconds before settling. The moment his fingers came within an inch of mine, a wave of cold radiated from his skin. It was the searing, deadening cold of liquid nitrogen. He didn't take the cigarettes. He simply turned around and, with that same gliding, silent gait, headed for the exit. The glass doors didn't slide open for him. The motion sensors didn't trigger. He simply passed through them. I swear on my life, he didn't touch the glass. His silhouette blurred for a fraction of a second, merged with the pain, and in the next heartbeat, he had vanished into the darkness of the parking lot. My legs gave out. I collapsed onto my stool, gasping for air as if I'd just been pulled from underwater. I sat there for 10 minutes, unable to move, staring at the black trail of oily footprints leading from the counter to the door. When the shock finally began to recede, I looked down at the change tray. The coin was still there. I picked it up with 2 fingers. It was ice cold. It looked like a standard American quarter. Washington's profile was there, but the metal had a strange, dark tint to it, as if it had been scorched by soot. I flipped it over to check the mint date. The numbers were crisp and clear. 2073. I dropped the coin as if it had burned me. It rolled across the floor and landed in one of the small puddles of black liquid the visitor had left behind. The liquid began to hiss. The coin started to melt, dissolving into the black sludge and emitting a thin, acrid wisp of greenish smoke. The black prints on the floor began to smoke too, eating into the tile and leaving deep, charred ruts in the ground. I closed the store at 5 o'clock that morning. I didn't wait for my relief. I just hung a closed sign on the door, locked up, got into my car, and drove. I didn't even bother calling my manager. The next day, I sent him a text saying I was quitting and blocked his number. I don't know who or what came into that store that night. A time traveler? A ghost? A demon? I only know one thing: there are things in this world that do not obey our laws of physics. And they walk among us while we sleep. The night hides many things, but sometimes it pulls back the curtain, showing us things we aren't prepared to see. If these stories have left you with a chill on the back of your neck or made you glance nervously at your dark window, then our time together was well spent. Drop a comment and let me know which of these 3 stories got to you the most. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next descent into the shadows. Stay safe, lock your doors tight, and remember, if it feels like someone is watching you tonight, they probably are. See you soon. And good night. If you can sleep.